We have thousands of people who go missing every year, just here in the United States, and there's no discrimination on the missing. They are young, old, black, white, male or female, even children. It's time to stop. Here at home is still missing, and they've not found any new clues. It's women who are pregnant, it's women who have jobs, and it's women who have not seen even fetal abductions. Have you seen me? Welcome to my channel, everyone. Thank you so much for caring. Hello, welcome back to Chasing a Murder. We are now on part 3 of Life Beyond the Grave, the tragic story attached to the Lori Vallow. On last episode, we learned a lot about Chad Daybell, and we're going to learn a lot more about Chad Daybell. I'm going to try to break it down, but there's just so much information out there that I find that is important to understanding where his mind is and how the story ended up the way that it did. We're going to hop back just a little bit here because I want to bring you in to how Chad Daybell started getting a little bit more confident with these gifts. After Chad's near-death experiences, he says that he now had an interest in the gospel topics like never before, and he began to devour the church-related books and scriptures. And again, I want to remind you, around this time, he's sensing these very disembodied spirits. And he is kind of receiving direct promptings and impressions from these spirits. Chad also kind of goes back and thinks about a few incidents that he kind of takes as a near-death experience, but really wasn't. And starts to put all this together and combine it and believes that somebody is actually after him. He says, I sense that someone didn't necessarily want me dead, but mostly dead. And he says that jumping off the cliff wasn't helping his odds. So he's thinking someone is after him, but he doesn't necessarily say who. Just before he starts college, Chad Daybell is at LDS Church Missionary training, Provo, Utah. That is the location of the church's largest missionary training center. 475 missionaries enter for 3 to 9 weeks of training before they depart for their mission field, becoming part of more than 58,000 or more than 120 countries. About 1,100 instructors, many of them who are returned missionaries, teach 62 languages. This is pretty massive. And if you are Mormon, you know that your children will be called to mission. And so young adults like Chad Daybell are preparing for this, and they're getting excited about it. Chad's mission is important because he says this marks one of the biggest turning points in his life, besides getting married, having children, getting a new job, and then meeting Lori Vallow in the future. Chad Daybell is sitting in a classroom. He's preparing to go on the mission, and the teacher shares with the class a poem about the Savior leaving his heavenly home to suffer for the indignities of the earth life, to die for us. He said, as the teacher read it, he could visualize the scenes of what was happening in the poem. And he started sobbing in gratitude. He said he couldn't stop. He said the teacher just stared at him to say, get a grip, man. It's just a poem. Chad Daybell and a few of his associates, they are there and they're learning Spanish. Chad is serving from 1987 to 1989. and he's heading to New Jersey, Marsden, in mid-September. Once he arrives, he remembers thinking this is a totally different world than he's ever used to seeing. It's a bit of a rough area. It's mostly Hispanic, as well as poverty-driven. They walk the streets and talk to people and make appointments with the people that are inviting. And these appointments are to sit and talk with the people, get to know each other, and teach them about their beliefs or the Mormon religion. And they usually at least work in pairs. He and his partner arrive at one home. He said they offered him one of 3 chairs in a home, and a dark-haired 2-year-old boy climbed on his lap. He said the little boy was filthy, but when he looked down into the boy's eyes, he saw a great soul in that little body. He said it brought him to the brink of tears to think of the trials and tribulations that little boy would face. He was learning the Spanish language fairly quickly, and he immediately felt accepted and loved by the Hispanic members in the community. He meets one Hispanic family, and they begin to talk. And he notices that this guy starts talking about dreams and visions that he received. Chad is intrigued, and he's very interested in getting in on this topic. But he says he has to continue to hide his visionary gift. And at that time, he hadn't even told anybody about his near-death experience at the reservoir. He was absolutely amused by the fact that they were talking so openly about visions. He looked around the room and he noticed that even their friends and family members were wholeheartedly accepting these visions that he was speaking about. They weren't just any vision. These visions were sent from heaven. This is the turning point Chad is speaking about. Chad says his companion is talking with the other family members. So he started talking to this guy by the name of Raphael. He starts talking to this guy, Raphael. He says, I have visions too, but I don't dare tell anyone. Back in Utah, they think I'm crazy. My bishop probably would have called you into his office to chastise you after your testimony today. He said the guy, Raphael, looked at him in shock, and he asked him, quote, the Mormons in Utah don't talk about these things, end quote. Chad said he shook his head, and Raphael responded that that's the key reason I knew this church was true. The first vision, the angel Moroni, John the Baptist appearing, Peter, James, and John given priesthood, and the angels at the Kirkland temple. It's the whole foundation of the church. He said that guy got really fired up, but this opened up something new for Chad. Inside, it seemed that Chad was firing up too. Needless to say, when he left that guy, he had a new outlook on how he could approach his religion, but he knew he'd have to keep it hidden. He met with several more people, and a few that I felt made another impression on him. He runs into characters who worship voodoo, and this meeting was actually very scary to Chad. There's a couple there, and they invite them into the apartment. They get seated, and the man has his wife bring them drinks. The woman seemed to carry an evil, according to Chad, and the man, he was just very strange. He was showing him all the injuries that he got from his country. When Chad looks around the room, he believes that he sees these items that kind of look like they relate to voodoo. The woman brings back some drinks, and it looks like a clear liquid, he says, like a Sprite. But when he looks down at the bottom, it appears like there's some kind of powder substance just sitting down there. He nudges his partner and tells him to look in the glass. And his partner notices it, and they tell the couple that we have to go and abruptly leave. He said when they left, the woman looked demonic, which means to him that she is most likely possessed. It makes you wonder what Chad might have talked to him about in detail, because we do know that Chad hides stuff. He says so in his book. It's 1988, and in the summer, he is transferred to serve as a district leader in a downtown Newark. He's a district leader. He says during his time here, he said he had a lot of time for personal growth, but the place didn't give him the supernatural experiences as Morristown. He seems disappointed about that. He complained about the areas that he was serving, and he said, when you constantly hear sirens, you get called vulgar names from every porch. You grow a little numb to your surroundings. And it seems to bother him when he sees things like an abandoned burning car or seeing a store window get shattered. It seems to be routine. He says 3 months later, after living in a circus called Newark, one incident that he writes about in his book is that he was standing just out in the open when somebody stands up and points a pistol straight at him. Then suddenly the guy just takes off running. He believes that's another close call and that this had to do with a heavenly intervention. Chad approaches the very end of his mission, and he was desiring to go back to that same area in New Jersey where he's experiencing these supernatural events. The president actually allows him to do this. And he describes this story or this encounter with a woman where she's in an abusive situation. I'm going to cut this very short. And he just continues to keep coming back to help her out. But she has a boyfriend that is not happy about this, and he's showing aggression. Eventually, Chad leads this woman to their church, where he warns the church about this abusive boyfriend. And while the woman is attending church one Sunday, the church is alerted to watch out for this guy, and this guy shows up, and he's arrested and in prison for about 6 years. Before the guy was arrested, Chad says that he had actually threatened Chad. They had found a knife on him. So this is another of his near-death experiences. He tallies all these strange things that happen in his life, and they're filed in folders, and those folders are kept, and he tells these stories over and over and over. Finally, he reaches the very end of his mission. And so, a friend of his by the name of Jenny asked him to give her a priesthood blessing. During that blessing, she tells Chad that she receives a vision. And it's a vision of a girl with short blonde hair praying at the side of her bed. The girl was asking the Heavenly Father to guide her and help her find the right person to spend her life with. And Jenny tells her dear friend Chad that this woman that she's seeing is Chad's future wife. Chad Daybell returns home to that small town that he lives in. And at this point, this is when, and I know you guys hear me talking about him being a sextant, but it's hard to put it in perfect order. This is where he comes back. He's preparing to go to college. He meets someone important, and this is how he gets into that job, according to him. A couple of weeks after he has returned from his mission, Chad is speaking with his brother Paul, and he's going through the 1988 Springville High School yearbook. And Chad seems to be very excited. Chad said, quote, "I flipped through it and I saw a half page featured with photos about a girl named Tammy Douglas," end quote. Chad says when he saw her face, he got this electrifying shock throughout his body. He realizes that that vision that Jenny had might be true, because staring back at him was this beautiful girl with short blonde hair. Chad was living by Tammy. He had gone to school with Tammy, but he doesn't really remember her very well. So it kind of seems that that vision that Jenny has kind of promotes Chad to kind of start looking and see who fits that visionary dream. Chad's brother Paul tells Chad that Tammy actually works as the city's cemetery secretary. And Chad seems to be very excited about that. So Chad's trying to figure out, why haven't I met her yet? She's been so close by. He's finding all these signs he's looking for signs anyways to point to him who is his soulmate. Why didn't she stand out? She was there the whole entire time. So he believes that the spiritual veil kept him from noticing her in high school. So oftentimes the LDS has these little gatherings, and sometimes they're for singles or other groups. So Chad attends the Springville Singles Ward, and he's hoping that this beautiful girl would be there. He locates her, and he says that their eyes lock for one moment, but he never gets a chance to speak to her. Chad says he attends another singles ward, which was the next day, and he finds himself playing a game of volleyball and finally rotates to the point that he and Tammy are kind of facing one another. He says Tammy looks straight across at him and threatens to spike the ball in his face. Chad didn't really say anything back. He just said he smiled. He said they didn't speak anymore that night, but he decided to call her and ask her to go out on a double date with a friend of his. So the two go on a date. Now, this is very interesting. This is how Chad began working at the cemetery, according to him. Tammy finds out that a former employee just quit the position at the cemetery. So Tammy actually reached out to Chad Daybell about this job. She's the reason he was working there. Tammy is not working at the exact office as Chad. She's actually working downtown Springville, but often drops reports off at the place where Chad works. And he said she actually visits quite often, and especially when he's on break. And so they're actually creating this courtship in a cemetery. After 10 weeks of dating, he finds himself praying about these strong emotions and the love that he had developed for Tammy. So he said he suddenly decided to propose to her, and he received such a strong yes. That response brought tears to his eyes. He said he had so many no's, and I don't know what he's referring to. He didn't get a few jobs that he had wanted, but that's all he really shared with us. I found this interesting that it's the night before Thanksgiving, and he kneels down before her and gives Tammy a diamond ring and asks her to marry him. And she says yes, again. Tamara Douglas was now spending her Thanksgiving days showing off her ring to extended family. What is interesting is Chad says that Tammy is making life easy for him. She seems to do everything for him. She got him the job that he has. She helps him with school, and she will help him a lot more in the future, which we'll learn. But he says that they registered for 3 classes together at BYU during the winter semester, and Tammy literally saved his grade in statistics, and he admits that he would have never survived that class without her. So they're at Brigham Young, freshman year. Before we move forward, I want to give you an idea of where Tammy come from and how she come to Springville. She was born in California, or South California, in Pasadena and Anaheim. At age 13, she moves with her family to Springfield, Utah, where the majority of the faith in that area is Mormon. She's a good kid. She's a good student. And she absolutely enjoyed music and reading. Tammy was in the Springville High School band where she played drums and clarinet. But her true passion was for the love of books. When she was younger, Tammy actually created her own library. Tammy liked to pretend that she ran a library when she was just a little girl. She created that library and she would lend out books to her siblings with actual library cards, and if they were late, with real fines. After high school, she applies for BYU. And like we mentioned earlier, she's working as the secretary for Springville's Parks Department. She typed thousands of handwritten burial records into computer databases, so she had some computer experience. She worked as the Springville City billing secretary and receptionist from around 1988 up and on and off to 1996. She also worked as a librarian for years. Tammy is eager and ready to start a family. She's always dreamt of that, and she also enjoys animals immensely. And she's known within that community as a very sweet woman, a very giving, kind person. So we're learning that she and Chad are hitting it off. She has said yes, that she'll marry him. And the two share some passions and love for things such as reading books, storytelling, the LDS, even games. So something I did learn later was that Chad Daybell was very interested in magic, spirits, life after death, as well as a big absolute love for Harry Potter. We hear that he even dabbled a bit in playing in Dungeons and Dragons, which is, if true, will be important to what we learn in this story later. Chad loved to dig through the old scriptures and doctrines, looking at old stories. He's looking for those hidden messages, and he's looking for validation for all these beliefs that he's developing. Chad feels like he's struggling with a creative mind, and so he starts looking towards other people and listening closer to their stories. And he and Tammy are preparing for a wedding. Okay, guys, so that I can handle this series a little bit easier, I'm cutting it down to around 20 minutes per series. So we're going to end part 3 here, and I'll start working on part 4. Once we get Chad and his relationships caught up to Lori's date, I'll flip back to Lori. And soon you'll start seeing more names come into this. So possibly the next video that I upload, we will kind of go over a like a relation tree, just to make sure everybody understands where we're going. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in part 4.